What if the one person meant to encourage your dreams was the first to laugh at them? A 9-year-old boy proudly shares his father's incredible job, only to be mocked by his own teacher. But when the truth walks in wearing a NASA badge, the entire classroom learns a lesson they'll never forget. It was Career Week at Crestfield Elementary in Charlotte, North Carolina, the one week of the year when third graders got to trade spelling quizzes for something far more exciting. Parents came in with props and stories, and for a moment kids got to see their heroes. Mums in scrubs, dads in construction vests, aunts with laptops, uncles with firefighter helmets. It was a celebration of grown-up lives through the eyes of 8- and 9-year-olds, each eager to claim their piece of the spotlight. Malik Thompson sat cross-legged near the front of the room, his knees bouncing with barely constrained energy. At 9 years old, he was small for his age, but sharp, always curious, always asking questions that sometimes made adults blink twice. He had a way of speaking that made you feel like he thought every word carried weight, and today, every word did. His dad was coming. He'd said he might be a little late because of meetings, but he'd show. Malik had been counting down all week, practicing what he'd say, even sketching a drawing of his dad holding a satellite dish in one hand and the Earth in the other. It was folded neatly in his backpack, right next to the notes he'd scribbled on lined paper. Orbit, relay, moon signal, spacecraft. He was ready. When Mr. Reynolds asked the class to go around and share what their parents did, the room buzzed with excitement. One by one, kids stood up. My mum's a lawyer. My dad fixes trucks. My uncle flies planes. There were claps, giggles, gasps. And then it was Malik's turn. He sat up straighter, his voice clear and proud. My dad works at NASA. For a moment the air froze, not in awe, but in doubt. A pause that stretched just a little too long. A couple of kids exchanged glances. One snorted quietly. Another whispered, "No way." But it was Mr. Reynolds, the man standing at the front of the room with thinning hair and a collared shirt tucked too tightly into his khakis, who delivered the blow that landed the hardest. He chuckled. Not a hearty laugh, not the kind that invites others in, but a low, dismissive sound, the kind of laugh that closes a door. NASA. "Huh," he said, his eyebrows lifting just a bit. "That's quite the imagination, Malik. Maybe next time we aim for something a little more believable." That was it. No follow-up, no wink to say he was joking, just a shrug and a glance down at his clipboard as he moved on. A few kids chuckled, and one girl in the back actually repeated it under her breath. More believable? Like it was some inside joke. Malik didn't say anything. He stared down at the colorful rug beneath him, the one with the alphabet in bright block letters, his fists curling into themselves on his lap. His shoulders, which had been pushed back just moments ago, now folded in like a balloon losing air. He could feel the heat crawling up his neck, not from embarrassment, but something else. Something heavier. Anger. Confusion. And all of it rooted in one man's careless laugh. Mr. Reynolds kept going, oblivious or pretending to be. He called on more kids, clapped for more parents, all while Malik sat perfectly still, like maybe, if he didn't move, he could disappear. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. When other parents showed up, one with a bakery sample tray, another in a firefighter's uniform, the class lit up with applause. Photos were taken, hugs were given. But Malik? He didn't clap, didn't cheer, he barely touched his lunch, didn't laugh when his friends made up songs by the vending machines, didn't race for the swings at recess like he always did. His drawing stayed crumpled at the bottom of his backpack. What was the point? How could one sentence, one moment, make everything feel different? Because it wasn't just the laugh, it was the ease of it. The way someone in charge, someone who was supposed to encourage dreams, had written his off without even asking a question. What Mr. Reynolds didn't know, couldn't have guessed, was that Malik wasn't lying. He wasn't making it up to sound cool. His dad, Dr. Andre Thompson, was an aerospace systems engineer at NASA. He'd been working on a lunar communication relay system for nearly a year, designing equipment to maintain contact between Earth and upcoming moon missions. He wore a NASA badge every day, not because it looked impressive, but because it was required. But none of that mattered now. To Mr. Reynolds, someone like Malik couldn't possibly have a dad like that. And that hurt more than the laugh. 3 nights before, Malik had been sitting in the garage with his dad while he sorted cables and tools. Malik had been perched on a milk crate with a juice pouch in one hand and a million questions ready. "Wait, so the moon can't just text Earth?" he asked. Dr. Thompson laughed, not in mockery but with joy. "Not exactly," he said. "Signals have to bounce through satellites. Depending on where the moon is, it can take a while. It's like trying to FaceTime someone in the mountains with one bar. So space has bad Wi-Fi," Malik had said with a grin. "Terrible," his dad confirmed, and they both laughed. Those were Malik's favorite moments. No lessons, no lecture, just curiosity and answers. His dad had a quiet confidence, a thoughtful presence. He didn't raise his voice often. He didn't have to. His words carried weight. When Malik asked if he could bring one of the NASA folders to class, Dr. Thompson had hesitated. "Some of this stuff is classified," he'd said. "I don't think show and tell likes classified information. Just one page?" "You don't need a page," his dad had replied. "All you need is your voice. Tell them what I do. Tell them you're proud." Malik had hesitated. "What if they don't believe me?" "Then that's their problem, not yours," his dad had said. "But what if they laugh?" Dr. Thompson had gone quiet for a moment, then he said, "Some people live in small boxes, Malik. If they see something that doesn't fit in their box, they get scared, or they laugh. But that's not your fault. Never shrink to fit someone else's box." Malik had nodded. He didn't fully understand it then, but something about it stuck. Now, sitting in class with that box pressing down around him, he wished he could remember it better. Career presentations were scheduled for the last part of the day. One by one, parents filed in. Malik kept glancing at the clock, kept checking the door. Chloe's mum handed out cupcakes. Tommy's dad brought in tools. Everyone got claps, questions, smiles. Malik just waited, and with every tick of the clock, that small voice of doubt crept in. What if his dad didn't show? What if Mr. Reynolds was right? What if his dreams were too big for this room? He shook the thoughts away, but they clung to him. Just like the laugh, just like the silence that came after. The clock on the classroom wall ticked louder than it had all morning, or at least that's how it felt to Malik Thompson. After the sting of Mr. Reynolds' laugh and the weight of the silence that followed, the rest of the school day moved in slow motion. The lunch period came and went, but Malik barely touched the peanut butter and jelly sandwich his mum had carefully cut into triangles. He wasn't hungry, not after that. Not with his stomach twisted in knots. He watched other kids laughing, trading snacks, tossing balled-up napkins toward the trash can, but he couldn't join in. His mind was somewhere else, floating in a cloud of doubt, circling around the one question that refused to let go. What if Dad doesn't show? The Malik who had stood up that morning, eager, proud, excited, was gone. In his place sat a boy who kept glancing at the classroom door, each second stretching endlessly as the afternoon wore on. Career presentations were now underway. The desks had been pushed to the sides of the room, folding chairs lined up in rows. Kids sat on the edge of their seats, buzzing with excitement as parents trickled in, one by one. Mr. Reynolds was back in his element, clipboard in hand, smile firmly reattached, cracking safe jokes and making cheerful introductions. But every time he looked at Malik, his eyes darted away quickly, as if the boy's presence reminded him of something he'd rather forget. Malik noticed. He noticed everything now. The way his teacher avoided his gaze, the way a few kids still smirked when they glanced in his direction, and the way his own hands couldn't stay still, thumbs nervously circling the edge of his seat, feet tapping the floor in anxious rhythm. One by one, parents made their presentations. Ava's mum talked about working at the hospital. Julian's grandpa brought in old police badges from his time on the force. The class clapped. Mr. Reynolds clapped. Everyone seemed engaged. Everyone but Malik, who sat silently, eyes locked on the door, still hoping, still wondering, still terrified. What if Dad got stuck in traffic? What if his meetings ran late? What if deep down Mr. Reynolds was right? What if people like him and his dad weren't meant to belong in a room like this? The thoughts started to pile up again, pressing on his chest like bricks. He tried to shake them off, tried to remember what his dad had told him about small boxes, about not shrinking. But in that moment, all Malik wanted to do was disappear. Then it happened. The door opened. Mr. Reynolds glanced at the list on his clipboard and began to speak. "Up next we have..." But he didn't finish the sentence, because the man who stepped through the doorway wasn't waiting for an introduction. He didn't need one. He filled the room with presence alone. Dr. Andre Thompson stood tall and calm in a navy grey blazer, slacks pressed sharp and a clean white shirt buttoned up beneath a NASA badge that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. He paused just inside the doorway, eyes scanning the room until they landed on Malik. Their eyes locked for half a second. Malik shot up in his seat. He didn't say anything, didn't have to. His whole body spoke for him. The way he straightened his back, the way his fingers stopped fidgeting, the way his lips curled ever so slightly at the corners. Mr. Reynolds took a half step back as if the gravity in the room had suddenly shifted. "Hello, everyone," Dr. Thompson began, his voice calm but commanding. "I'm Dr. Andre Thompson. I design systems that help spacecraft communicate across deep space." The room went still, not silent out of discomfort like that morning, but the kind of quiet that comes when something, or someone, deserves full attention. "You know when NASA sends a rover to the Moon or Mars," he continued. "Well, those rovers need to send messages back home. They don't use cell towers or walkie-talkies. They use radio systems. My team helps build the technology that keeps those conversations alive, between Earth and machines millions of miles away." A hand shot up from the front row. "Is it like texting from space?" Dr. Thompson smiled. "Kind of. Imagine the worst cell service you've ever had. Now imagine trying to send a message from the moon, where there's no service at all. That's what we deal with. We build the space Wi-Fi. It's slow, complicated, but amazing." The kids laughed. Even Mr. Reynolds let out a strange chuckle, but his eyes kept darting between Dr. Thompson and Malik, who now sat a little taller, chin lifted, face glowing with quiet pride. Dr. Thompson didn't need a slideshow or props. He didn't need to prove anything with shiny gadgets. His presence alone was the proof, the badge on his chest, the knowledge in his words. The respect in the way he spoke to the kids, answering every question like it mattered. And as he wrapped up his talk just before he turned to leave, Dr. Thompson paused. "Before I go," he said, "I heard someone earlier say that working at NASA might be unrealistic." The room tensed. Mr. Reynolds' throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. Dr. Thompson didn't look at him. Instead, he turned to Malik and smiled gently. "I guess it depends on who's doing the imagining." For a moment, the words just floated there. No one moved, no one spoke. It was the kind of silence that said everything. Then, like a switch flipping, the class erupted into applause. Not polite clapping, not forced, but real, from-the-gut applause. Malik couldn't help it. His smile broke wide open, his shoulders relaxed. For the first time all day, the air didn't feel heavy. It felt right. Mr. Reynolds tried to regain control, clearing his throat. Thank you, Dr. Thompson. That was very informative." Dr. Thompson gave a polite nod. "Of course. I've got to head back. The moon doesn't like to be kept waiting." A few kids laughed again. And just before walking out, he stopped beside Mr. Reynolds. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a scene. He simply said, "I hope your students always feel heard, especially the ones who dream big." Then he left. Just like that. But the atmosphere he left behind stayed. Mr. Reynolds stood frozen for a beat, clipboard hanging uselessly at his side. Around him, the kids weren't looking at him. They were looking at Malik. And Malik, he wasn't showing off. He wasn't smug. He just sat there, quietly confident, like someone who had finally been seen the way he deserved to be. The balance in the room had shifted, the narrative had flipped. One moment, one entrance, and suddenly, the boy who'd been doubted was now the one everyone wanted to hear more from. Mr. Reynolds tried to continue, calling on the next parent, but his words felt thin, as if even he knew the spotlight had moved on. Whatever came next, the cupcakes, the tire pressure gauges, the laptops, it all felt smaller now, because the truth had walked into that classroom wearing a NASA badge and reminded everyone what was possible. For Malik, it wasn't just validation, it was a turning point, not because his dad had proved something, but because he hadn't needed to. The truth had always been enough. All it needed was a moment, and now that moment had arrived. Mr. Reynolds didn't say much after Dr. Thompson walked out of the classroom, but the silence that followed him was loud enough. He stood there, clipboard limp in his hand, while the room buzzed with the hum of whispered conversations and eyes that kept drifting not toward him, but toward Malik. The boy who just that morning had been laughed at now sat at his desk with a quiet stillness, not smug, not triumphant, just real, grounded, as if the truth had finally settled back into place. The next parent stepped up for their career presentation, but the energy in the room had shifted and everyone could feel it. The kids were polite, they clapped when they were supposed to, but nothing landed the way it had before. Because once you've seen someone break through a ceiling no one thought they were supposed to touch, it's hard to go back to pretending that ceiling ever mattered. As the final bell rang and the usual end-of-day shuffle began, backpacks zipping, chairs scraping, kids calling out to one another, Malik remained at his desk, hands folded, eyes steady. He wasn't in a rush to leave. Maybe part of him was still soaking it in, or maybe he just needed a second to breathe in the feeling of having been seen. Most of the class filtered out. A few gave him a curious glance, a couple even smiled, but no one said anything just yet. And then came the footsteps. Slow, hesitant, the kind of steps someone takes when they know they've got something to say but aren't sure how to say it. Mr. Reynolds stood beside Malik's desk, shifting awkwardly on his feet, clearing his throat before speaking. "Hey, Malik," he said, his voice softer than usual, almost too casual. "Your dad? He seems like a pretty smart guy." Malik looked up, expression unreadable. "He is—" Mr. Reynolds nodded slowly, scratching the back of his neck. "Yeah, I can see that. I wanted to say I may have judged too quickly earlier." Malik didn't respond, just waited. Mr. Reynolds swallowed. "Sometimes teachers, people, we make mistakes. We don't always realize when something we say comes out wrong." Malik's gaze didn't waver. "But you laughed," he said, not with anger but with a clarity that made the words hit harder than any shout ever could. Mr. Reynolds froze for a moment, his jaw working through the weight of that truth. "Yeah," he said finally. "I did. And I'm sorry for that. It wasn't right. I should have listened." Malik didn't nod. He didn't try to make it easier. He just stood, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and walked slowly toward the door. But just before stepping out, he looked back. "It wasn't my imagination," he said, voice steady. "That's really my dad." And with that, he was gone. That night, Charlotte's sky was streaked with gold and lavender, the sunset casting long shadows across the Thompson home. Inside, the kitchen light hummed softly, and Malik sat at the table with a bowl of cereal, dinner by choice. Across from him, Dr. Thompson leaned against the counter, sipping from a mug that read "Space Nerd" in faded blue letters. Neither spoke for a while. It wasn't awkward, just a quiet, shared space between father and son. Finally, Malik broke the silence. "Did you hear him?" Dr. Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Your teacher?" Malik nodded. "When I said you worked at NASA?" He laughed. Like it was a joke. Dr. Thompson set the mug down and crossed the room, pulling out a chair and sitting across from his son. "Yeah," he said softly. "I heard." "Why do people do that?" Malik asked. It wasn't bitterness in his voice, just confusion. Dr. Thompson looked at him for a long moment before answering. Sometimes, he said, people live in small boxes. They've got this picture in their head of what the world's supposed to look like, who belongs where, who gets to do what. And when something, or someone, doesn't fit in that picture, they laugh. It's not always mean-spirited, sometimes it's just ignorance. But either way, he leaned in slightly, it's not your job to shrink so you can fit inside someone else's box. Malik stirred his cereal with his spoon. I didn't feel smart today, he murmured. I felt small. Dr. Thompson's eyes didn't leave his. Don't let someone else's doubt erase your truth. You know who you are. You know who I am. That's what matters. Malik nodded, just a little, a quiet agreement. Then, after a pause, Dr. Thompson added, and you did good today. You told the truth. You held your ground. That's brave, Malik. That's real brave. A tiny smile crept across Malik's face. It didn't last long, but it was there, and it was enough. The next morning at school, something was different. Malik noticed it the second he walked into the building. Kids who'd ignored him the day before suddenly wanted to sit beside him. One leaned over during morning announcements and asked if his dad had ever met an astronaut. Another asked if he could bring in one of his dad's space gadgets next time. Malik didn't puff up, he didn't brag, he just nodded, answered their questions and kept it moving. At recess, while others were chasing soccer balls and climbing jungle gyms, Mila, a quiet girl from his class, walked beside him. They believe you now, she said matter-of-factly. Malik shrugged. They didn't have to. Mila grinned. Still nice, though. In the staff lounge, Mr. Reynolds sat at the far end of the table, a cup of lukewarm coffee cradled in both hands. He hadn't spoken much since the previous afternoon. The weight of what had happened, the shift it caused, still lingered. Before lunch, he slipped a folded piece of paper into Malik's cubby. Not typed. Not formal. Just a handwritten note. After the bell rang and the cafeteria quieted, Malik found it. It read, Malik. I was wrong. You never should have had to prove anything to us. Keep dreaming big. Mr. Reynolds Malik didn't smile. He didn't read it twice. He folded it neatly and slipped it into the front pocket of his backpack, quietly, carefully. He hadn't needed the apology, but maybe Mr. Reynolds had needed to write it. That afternoon, as the final bell rang and the hallways filled with the familiar end-of-day chaos, Malik walked out the front doors with his head high. Not because of what the class thought now, not because the teacher had changed his tune, but because of what had never changed. His dad was who he said he was. A NASA engineer, a builder of space systems, a dreamer. And more than that, Malik had told the truth, even when no one believed him. Somewhere in that classroom, a teacher had been reminded of something he'd forgotten, that kids carry dreams too big for small minds to measure. And when we laugh at those dreams, when we write them off without a second thought, we don't just crush ambition, we shrink their voices. Malik's voice. It stayed strong, because the truth doesn't need applause. It just needs someone brave enough to speak it, and Malik had done just that. As the author of this story, I want to take a moment to reflect on what Malik's journey teaches us. Not just about childhood and courage, but about the responsibility we all carry in how we respond to the dreams of others. Malik Thompson stood in front of his class with pride in his voice and truth in his heart, only to be met with laughter and doubt. It's a moment far too many of us recognize. Maybe you were that kid once, the one with a big dream that didn't quite fit someone else's picture of what was realistic. Maybe you've been silenced by a chuckle that wasn't funny or a dismissive comment that stung longer than it should have. And maybe, like Malik, you started to question your own voice. But here's the truth. No one else's disbelief should define your reality. The world will always have people who live in small boxes, who laugh at what they don't understand. That's not your fault. That's not your burden. The important thing is that you keep speaking, keep showing up, keep telling your truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's inconvenient for others. And for those of us who are teachers, leaders, mentors, or simply grown-ups in the room, this story is a reminder: our words carry weight. One thoughtless comment can plant doubt that takes years to undo, but one moment of belief, one act of validation, that can change everything. It's never too late to be the person who listens, who lifts, who affirms the dreams others are brave enough to share. To every kid out there dreaming of the stars, or anything bigger than what they see around them, your voice matters, your story matters, and sometimes the only thing standing between you and belief is the courage to keep speaking when no one else claps. From all of us here at US Justice Story, thank you for spending time with us today. If Malik's story resonated with you, if it reminded you of your own journey or opened your eyes to someone else's, we're truly grateful you listened. We believe in stories that matter, stories that reveal not just injustice, but the resilience and dignity of the people who rise in the face of it. If this message touched you, please consider subscribing, sharing, and joining us again. Together, we can keep telling stories that amplify truth, honor, courage, and build empathy. Until next time, stay kind, stay brave, and never let anyone shrink your voice.